Welcome to Chautauqua people. My name is John V. My guests today are Father Douglas May and Father Paulos Ishak Youssef. Father May is a U.S. priest in Egypt, and Father Youssef, Paul, we'll call him, is a Catholic Coptic priest in Egypt. We're making this program during the Chautauqua Week on Egypt, and both of them are featured in the afternoon program. Both are giving seminars at the Catholic House during the week. I wonder if you could tell me each a little bit about yourselves. And Doug, what's your background?
Well, grew up in the Boston Hills, south of Hamburg. If we can confess, we graduated from high school together, and from Hamburg High in '67. Just quickly, after high school, went in the U.S. Air Force, stationed in Germany, then went to University of Buffalo. After University of Buffalo, worked in the Emirates in hotel management, and then eventually came back to the U.S., joined the Maryknoll Society of Missionary Priests, and for 20 of the last 35 years in Maryknoll, I've been in Egypt.
In Egypt. And you went to divinity school in?
Went to divinity school, Maryknoll School of Theology. That was more or less between 1979 and 1986, with a period of on-the-job training in Egypt.
Correct.
Where I made acculturation adjustments and was evaluated. I also studied at the Pontifical Institute for Arab Islamic Studies in Rome for 1 year.
Right. And where did you learn your Arabic?
At Pisa in Rome for 1 year. I also studied at American University Cairo for 1 year, the Kamboni Language Institute in Cairo for 1 year, and then I actually took colloquial Arabic at the International Language Institute in Cairo for 6 months. So altogether about 3.5 years of formal study.
Very hard work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Father Paul, tell us about your background.
Okay, my name is Paulos Ishak, and I am a Coptic Catholic priest from Egypt, Upper Egypt. My diocese is Minya, and I studied in Al Maadi in seminary 8 years. After this, I ordained 4 years ago.
Right.
So I came to here to improve my English, to see the Church of America, to see the people of America, something like this.
And how long have you been on this trip to the States?
I spent 1 month, and I have 1 month again.
Oh, good. I hope it turns out to be a good trip for you.
Thank you.
Now tell me what your duties are.
In Egypt.
In Egypt.
Well, formerly, I've had different jobs. I've kind of been a jack of all trades, but over the 20 years, I taught at his seminary, which is St. Leo the Great Coptic Catholic Seminary. I taught there for 10 years. I was part of the formation education team there. I taught at the Al Fallujah Nursing School, which is a Palestine Red Crescent Society school for Palestinian refugees living in Egypt to learn trades that they could obviously market, mainly in the nursing profession. I've been working with the expatriate community because, as I think might have been mentioned, I'm the only U.S.-born native English-speaking priest in the country currently. So I have an expatriate congregation as well as some Egyptians. And the expatriates come from about 22 different countries that speak English as a first, second, or third language. And they're basically multinational people, NGOs, embassy people from various embassies and their families.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing I kind of been doing, bouncing off of my 10 years at the seminary, I have this what's called in Arabic, Ya Douglas, which is the Uncle Doug ministry, where I'm kind of like the big brother to a lot of these guys after they get ordained.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and Father Paul, what is your primary responsibility in Egypt?
Okay, as I said, I am a parish priest.
Parish priest.
Yes, and also I am responsible about Christian education in Fulminia. Yeah, so this is my job in Fulminia.
And how many families are in your parish?
3,000 family.
So that's a very large number, isn't it?
Yes, my parish is biggest parish in my diocese.
And how often do you have to conduct Mass?
Sorry?
You conduct Mass?
Bitsali Lodes.
We pray Mass maybe 2 times on Sunday and 1 Mass on Friday.
Okay, so it's 3 a week.
Yeah.
3 a week.
And
now,
every day we have a Mass, but it's short. But for people, 3 Masses, 1 Friday and 2 on Sunday.
2 on Sunday, and a very short daily Mass then.
Yeah,
Probably
and
in the
weekday.
morning. Now, many are not familiar with the background of the Coptic Church. Could you tell me about that? and what's unusual and the theological background?
Okay, it's a little complicated because you have a Coptic Orthodox Church, which is a much larger church. Okay, you have about 90 million people in Egypt. About 10% are Christian. The vast majority of those would be Coptic Orthodox. You have these 6 smaller Eastern Catholic rites, which are the Chaldeans, the Copts, the Armenians, the Syrians, the Melkites, the Maronites, and then some Roman Catholics like we have in the West. The big thing is the Coptic Catholic Church. If you remember, first of all, and Paulos could say this, but it might be easier for me to explain it, Coptic first meant Egyptian.
Yeah.
And that came from a Greek term. And
Egypto.
so all Egyptians were referred to as Copts.
Okay.
And then when you had the Arab Islamic invasion in the 7th century, little by little with the intermarriage and conversion of Egyptians to Islam, Coptic basically became equivalent to mean Christian as well as Egyptian, because it was the concept of the only true Egyptians that kept the culture and the purity of the race, if you want to call it that, were the ones who didn't convert. So then they were the Christians as well as Copts. So then they became one and the same.
Right.
Yeah, because when St. Mark came to Egypt, St. Mark Apostles, all of Egypt were Christian.
Christian.
Yes.
In the early church, the vast majority of maybe 90+%, maybe 99%, would have been Christian during that 1st or 2nd, 3rd century of Egypt.
Right. 1st, 2nd, 3rd century of Egypt, that would be what on the calendar we use?
Well, I mean, you're basically talking, I mean, until Islam came to Egypt around, what, 644, something like that?
Maybe
So roughly,
7th century.
but you had, you know, the church in general, the Christianity in general, until the time of Constantine, was considered an underground church. So it was a persecuted church,
Got
just
it.
like everywhere else. And during the Diocletian, I think, martyrdom, or the persecutions, they actually date their Coptic calendar, not from the birth of Jesus, but from the time of the Coptic martyrs during that persecution.
Yeah.
But
Diocletianus.
but little by little, the Egyptians became totally Christian, and then little by little, after the Islamic invasion of the 7th century, then the conversion rate started to make it become more of an Islamic population, Arab population, and less of an Egyptian Christian population.
So how do those proportions break out today in Egypt? You call Christian, and you could subdivide Christian denominations.
Roughly, Egypt, out of the 90 million people, give or take a million or two, of the general population, about 90% would be Muslim.
Muslim.
And then you'd have roughly 10% Christian. The vast majority, like I said, would be Coptic Orthodox. And then there'd be some Protestants, and then some Catholics of these 6 or 7 rites that I just mentioned.
Right.
So altogether, you'd have somewhere, let's say, 9 to 9.5 million tops. If you talk, I mean, statistics are argued about all the time. So some people will say it's as little as 6.5 million, but the general number and percentage that's reported would be about 10%, or roughly 9 million.
Right. Right. So then Christians are a minority
Yeah.
succinct minority in Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the relationships like between Christians and Muslims in Egypt?
Again, it varies. I don't know if you want to say anything, maybe you can add, but it really depends on education levels, and we might find ourselves talking about this a little later, but somewhat the tone that's set by the religious leaders of these villages or the cities. But it's more so of Upper Egypt. And so if the religious leaders have a good relationship with one another, the people kind of fall in line. But it can vary greatly. I mean, you have open-minded, non-sectarian Muslims and Christians that seem to get along. See, here's one of the big things. During the period of King Farouk and right up through Gamal Abdel Nasser, the stress was Egypt is a secular country. Okay? So in terms of wearing your religious affiliation kind of on your sleeve, it wasn't a big thing. I still have friends that they're Egyptians that graduated maybe like we did back in the 60s, and they went like to an Egyptian Jesuit school. Quite literally, you can spend 2 hours sitting with them in a conversation, and at the end of 2 hours, you don't know who's Christian and who's Muslim still.
Really?
You watch the old classic Egyptian movies from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and you would never know we were talking about the same country as today.
Right. Now, you had a video which you asked us to take a look at, and we're going to, if we can do this, we're going to show the URL for that video on YouTube. And it's titled Christian Minority Status. And if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Paulos Youssef, who's the priest in this film, he was a seminarian probably back in the 80s, and after his ordination from my friend Paul, or Paulos's Diocese of Minya, he very quickly gravitated into prison ministry.
Okay.
And he was taking care of visiting prisoners and also gathering clothes for the families and gathering money and other supplies for the families of these Christian prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually the Muslim prisoners say, there's nobody to take care of us. And he said, I'm a little worried if I start catering to you, the government might get involved and say I'm trying to convert you, whatever. I need to find a partner who's a Muslim leader, a sheikh, who can do this with me. So he found this Muslim sheikh that you will see in the video. They first became colleagues and started doing prison ministry together. Over a period of time, this kind of collegial relationship became a real solid, deep friendship. And then their respective parish of the priest, Father Paulos, and of the sheikh, the mosque, these congregations of these two locations started working together on the prison ministry thing, and eventually they themselves became friends.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where there possibly is a future to a better relationship between Christians and Muslims in Egypt. If they can see themselves as, I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, but we're both Egyptian, and we have a country to build together, and we have a common citizenship that we have to share and serve the other citizens of Egypt.
And those religious leaders play an immensely important role, do they not, in shaping the attitudes of the larger congregations? So that if the leaders of both the Muslim and the Christian congregation would say it's time for us to work together as to taking care of common prisoners.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is
influential.
You can even see this in other countries, not just in Egypt. You can have an Islamic or a Christian leader totally sour the relationships of the people that are influenced by them, or the opposite. Mm-hmm. You can have them lead them to being more open with each other and more cooperative with each other.
Right, right. And so we hope that most will become like Chautauquans, where we're eager to hear each other's views, to break bread and have meals together, and to share our ideas without becoming hostile. And that's a sermon on my part, but it's a heartfelt one. Mm. Now, I wonder if you go a bit further and tell us a little more about the relationship between the various Christian sects in Egypt today.
Okay, it can be difficult, okay, but one of the things I think is the Christian-Muslim relationship over the last three and a half years has deteriorated some because, again, the secular controls and the government controls over this relationship kind of disintegrated.
Right.
So Christian-Muslim relations, especially during the time of the Brotherhood and Mohammed Morsi being the head of the country, I think sank to a new low.
Okay.
But the important thing is, in the process of that, Christians actually saw themselves as needing to cooperate and to work together.
Okay.
Okay, during the time of Pope Shenouda III and previous Coptic Catholic patriarchs and other denominational leaders, there was very little cooperation, very little mutual respect. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then, with everything that's been going on between Pope Francis becoming the Roman Catholic or Catholic Pope, the Bishop of Rome, Bishop Tawadros, Pope Tawadros, now becoming the head of the Coptic Orthodox Church, and some of the tensions that have been created, the relationship and the cooperation and the mutual respect of these various religious leaders has really increased. Baba Tawadros, Pope Tawadros, one of his first visits outside of Egypt after becoming Coptic Orthodox Pope was to visit Pope Francis. Okay, and then when Ibrahim Sidrak became the new Coptic Catholic Patriarch, Tewodros, the Pope of the Coptic Orthodox, made a point of coming, attending, speaking, and giving the Coptic Catholic Patriarch a cross and the chain with the pendulum or the effigy of the Madonna on it. So these things have actually gotten better as the environment around them has deteriorated.
Right, right. Now, do Christians and Muslims tend to live in similar neighborhoods, or they tend to be separated? What's the pattern?
No, we live neighborhood as the same village. Okay, yes, and we live together.
We live together.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Now, I wonder if you could give us a little modern history about Egypt. And we understand the government has changed there. And if you could sort of trace things from the Mubarak era up to the present, let me ask a few questions along the way.
Okay. Again, I'm kind of taking the initiative because I think he's a little self-conscious. But, you know, you had the revolution that overthrew the monarchy back in the early 50s. And then you had, for a short period of time, you know, you had Muhammad Naguib and you had Gamal Abdel Nasser, and then you had Anwar Sadat. With the assassination of Anwar Sadat on October 6th of 1981, okay, Hosni Mubarak took over the country. I think at that time, nobody ever thought he'd be president for almost 30 years, but he was. And anyway, during that time, you also, starting with Anwar Sadat, you had this gradual Islamization of the country. Like I said, it was very secular during Gamal Abdel Nasser's time and before with King Farouk. But Sadat started bringing in more of this Islamic influence, even in terms of a change in the Constitution of Egypt, the second article of the Constitution. Mubarak more or less maintained that trend. The other thing is technically the Muslim Brotherhood was considered legal. It wasn't given a legal status. But little by little they started to surface. One of the things when Mubarak might get some criticism from the West, like the United States, on being, you know, kind of open-ended president, he'd say, well, it's either me or the Brotherhood, take your pick. So even though he would kind of be considered a military ruler, maybe even a military dictator, and technically since the revolution of 1952, it's been military rule in Egypt. So more or less this trend towards becoming more and more of an Islamic state started to move in that direction. And then when you had the revolution of January 2011, I think it started more as a secular thing, more as a knee-jerk reaction just to frustration and poverty and unemployment in the country. And as it took on a life of its own, then the Brotherhood saw an opportunity, since they were probably, even though it was illegal and underground, the only organization that once it was legalized and legitimized could actually form a party and present a candidate.
Right. Now then, Morsi was elected. Tell me about that election.
Okay, you had an initial election with, it was Morsi, Shafiq, Hamdin
Sabahi, yes, and many others also.
There were quite a few candidates, and the first vote was when? May of 2 years ago?
I can't remember. Yeah.
Anyway, you had the first election, and there were no clear majority candidates.
Correct.
Yes.
So what the military did...
Yeah, Morsi and Shafiq was equal,
Yeah.
so we make
a runoff election.
Yes, again.
With
So
only two candidates,
Yes.
which was Ahmed Shafiq,
and
Mohammed
Morsi.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Morsi was democratically elected.
Yeah.
And then what was the Morsi government like?
It was democratically elected, but it was not a democratic government in the style of which it governed.
Okay.
Right from the very beginning, it started to push an Islamic agenda. One of the things I think that needs to be understood too is the fact that there was this ideology. Some people could argue about this, but I'm a firm believer in this. Most of the young people in Tahrir were more or less on the secular side, but they also wanted to see an end to Mubarak and any type of Mubarak-connected rule.
Right.
They didn't want an Islamic government, but they also didn't want to see a return of Mubarak influence in a new government.
Okay.
So some either refused to vote at all, so they abstained. Some others said, well, we don't want an Islamic government, we don't want Morsi, but we want to vote. We won't vote for Shafiq, so therefore we're going to vote for Morsi. So you had this kind of biting off your nose to spite your face effect.
Right.
So, you know, and again, I'm not sure where we are in the sequence of this per se, but, you know, less than a year later, then you had the beginning of this Tamarud, or this rebel movement, which basically was a pretty universal movement of disgruntled voters, Christian and Muslim,
Right.
who then gathered 22 million signatures in a period of 2 or 2.5 months. And that basically climaxed on 30 June of last year, when you had the largest demonstration of Egyptians in the country's history, demonstrating between roughly 30 June, which they'd been painting on walls and everywhere else all over the place,
Right.
30 June, 30 June, 30 June. And so you had this huge demonstration, then right through the 3 July, demanding that Morsi and the Brotherhood step down. They refused to do it, and basically the people said to the military, we can't get rid of them, so you're going to have to.
Yeah, and Morsi said at the beginning, if you want me leave, I will leave. So at the 30 of June, people, 22 million, yes, signatures say, leave. Okay, he said, no, I will not leave.
In fact, he even said, I will die before I will leave.
Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness. So that was essentially 1 in 4 Egyptians signing the petition saying, Mr. Morsi, be gone.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think President Sisi, before he is a president, he said to Morsi, now people are angry, so you can say to them, be quiet, we will make another election. If you will accept me, I will stay. If you will refuse me, I will go. But Morsi said, no, I will not do this, because he knows that if he did this, everyone, he will say, go.
Okay. Okay. So now, so we have a new government. The military told Mr. Morsi, you must leave. They made him leave. How do most...
First, you must make a second election. Yes,
And he
to say the
refused to
people,
do
if the people said, we want you, you will stay.
Right.
If the people said, leave, you must leave. He said, no, I will not do this. I will die
Got it.
before I will do this.
So it was like a referendum.
Right.
Okay.
Now, what do most of your parishioners say about the current leadership, and are things better?
Now it's
Mr. Morsi?
better more than
Ishak,
before.
Kenisa Batatak.
Yes, now it's better. These days, better more than before.
Than it was before.
Yeah.
So most of the parishioners then are happy with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Doug, your time in Egypt has been substantial, and in the region in Kenya. I wonder if you could tell me where you've traveled to besides Egypt, and let me ask a question or two about your travels.
Okay. As I said, I first went to Egypt in 1982, basically for a couple of summers, eventually settled into there, and spent roughly 20 years. During that period, I had some health issues in terms of a leg with a bone infection, so I went to Kenya for 4 years. And until I got better, after 6 surgeries, I stayed in Kenya, and then when I was better and able to walk again, I went back to Egypt. Originally, I was part of what was called the Middle East Unit, and that actually, the group that originally was in Egypt, part of it went to the West Bank, to, if you want to call it occupied territories, you want to call it Palestine, whatever. And so I was going back and forth during the late 80s through the early 90s. I think my last trip was probably May 1991. Then occasionally I would go back to Egypt to visit friends, and I'd be asked to possibly assist doing some masses with the multinational forces and observers, the MFO in Sinai. So the last time I went there was actually 3 months after the signing of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords were September 93, and I believe I was there in December 93. And then I didn't go again for 20 years, and then twice in the last 7 or 8 months I've been able to go back, basically staying in the old city with friends, as well as just a quick overnight in Tel Aviv and a couple of nights in Ramallah.
Right. Have you had any tours? Anybody significant shared their views with you?
Well, it's been kind of interesting these last times, because normally I basically went to check on the people that we had working there and to make sure they were okay and possibly bring them some funding. When I went November of last year, it was the first time I'd actually visited where I was with a friend of mine from Coca-Cola, and I was kind of tagged along for part of his orientation to this area where Coca-Cola actually functions, both in terms of Israel and in terms of the West Bank. And so it was the first time that I'd actually had an Israeli tour guide take us through the old city. We went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, things like that. So it was really the closest I'd had to actually having the Israeli perspective on their country and how they saw not only their country, but how they saw the Palestinians. Because most of my exposure previous to that, and even on my second trip when I went this period, when I went back this past April, the focus was more on more or less the Palestinian part of this, and not so much the Israeli.
And what are your insights now, having seen things from both sides, about the current status in Israel and their future?
Well, one thing, I mean, you and I were seniors in high school in '67, and we were graduating in December '67, and that was the time of the '67 war.
June '67.
June '67. And so basically, you know, first of all, I mean, I won't get into the history because there's not enough time, but there was a partition concept way back around '48, and there were going to be 3 segments that were going to be called Palestine with majority Arab populations, 3 that were going to be Israel with majority Israeli or Jewish populations. That never happened yet, an Arab-Israeli war, and basically after that war, the Palestinians had about 22% of the country, roughly. People argue about that some too. And the Israelis actually had the rest. Originally, with the partition agreement, it was going to be like 53% for the Israelis, 40%, 47% with the Palestinians. The big thing is then with the '67 war, all of that, including the Sinai as well, became part of Israel.
Right.
Now, what's happened is you had UN Resolution 242 in 1967, UN Resolution 338 after the '73 war. You've had the Camp David Accords, you've had the Oslo Accords of September '93. Camp David, I think, was 1978, and implementation through 79. But all along, what seemed to be all the resolutions and most of the agreements and the spirits of most of those agreements was a return to pre-'67 borders.
Right.
Okay? Possibly because of the lack of the U.S. and the West to say these settlements that are constantly being built, especially in the West Bank, more so than Gaza, are illegal, which is what they were called originally. Then they were called obstacles to peace. Now no one seems to refer to them as anything except as a fait accompli. Then the wall and the road construction and everything else. I have found myself over the 47 years roughly watching this, especially the 37 years since I got directly involved because of the hotel experience in '77, of seeing that there is no viable Palestinian state. Okay, that we keep talking about a 2-state solution, we keep talking about the roadmap to peace. The roadmap to peace, for me, is a roadmap to pieces, being the plural, not P-E-A-C-E, but P-I-E-C-E. And then we've got the whole issue of what I see as a lip service Palestinian state is almost like down the road here in Silver Creek or some other place, which is a scattering of American-styled Indian reservations selling cheap gas and cigarettes, but not a viable state. And that, and then there's the whole issue of he wants to get into it, and there's time to talk about it, of even this possibility of some finagling going on where Sinai might have been merged with Gaza as part of a deal with the Brotherhood and Hamas and maybe some other folks to try to create a Palestinian state like that.
Right, right. So you're not hopeful about the future there?
Unfortunately, a friend of mine who's actually a Jewish professor in 1990 said in 5 years it would be too late, so 5 years would have been 1995. That was 19 years ago, so in some ways I've actually felt it's been too late for the last 19 years, along with Mark Ellis.
Right. Let's just finish for a moment or two, and we're slightly over time, but they'll take care of us. Let's talk about the future for Egypt and democracy and what your outlook for that is.
I think it will be very good future, you know.
Very good future.
Yeah. We hope.
We hope.
God is working, so
yeah.
Yes, and we want our country very good, so we will try to do this. And also I invite all of America to come to Egypt to see this.
Is it safe to come to Egypt now?
Yes.
Safer.
Safer.
Okay, it was phenomenally safe before the revolution of January 2011. It's a little hazardous, but it's improving.
Great.
No,
Great.
it's safe, yeah.
I must make the trip, and thank you very
Welcome.
much. Soon. Must make the trip soon.
Okay.
My name is John V. This has been Chautauqua People, and I've had two great guests from Egypt. And I urge you take a look again at the URL for that video. If you can't get the URL, Father Doug, help me. How can people Google it to get to it?
Okay, if you can basically get into YouTube, and so however you want to do that, I'm a little primitive because I'm of that generation.
Okay.
But then once you get into YouTube, type in Coptic Catholic Church. And if you do that, and then you start going through like the index where you have these pages of various entries, if you see the one that I believe says something like, watch this and be inspired.
Indeed.
Okay? When you see that, and it's about a 10-minute, maybe 10-minute, 40-second video, but usually I have found it in the past by just typing in Coptic Catholic Church and then looking for that watch and be inspired.
And you'll trust me, when we finish this up, all of our viewers will be richly rewarded by going through that, and I think it will be time immensely well spent. Again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you next time on Chautauqua People.